the dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, the heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set two plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, fourth floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator. Cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects, day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said "Ecology means everything" had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours. A late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name patch read Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. "Steam off," he said. "Air handler off. You got a ghost heater." He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron, the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. "Do you mind?" he asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm, the kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. "Old Chase," he said. "Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them." He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. "Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers." He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. "I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan." He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 1:18. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. "Sleep," he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: "Minor fire, major evacuation. No injuries, cause unknown." Mairead, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 3:03, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. There, she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens. Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, "Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall." The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these. Inside the library's bound journals, someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Mairead came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. We have to find the cabinet, she said, voice quiet like church. We have to ask Bram to not ask questions. Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. I can get you into the basement, he said. I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast. The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, Steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, done. A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, Juniper, thank you. She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. What do you want? She said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator. At the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel, a tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The 4th floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pump slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick. She heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Mairead was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Mairead tuned by memory and sang a single, low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The 4th floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Mairead sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. "Facilities found something," he said. "You want to come see?" The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76 when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep, mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter. Real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address, for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. "I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Mairead spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester," which is a low bar that feels high after October. Isolde slept early and woke with the feeling of being watched in a kind way. She rolled over and looked at the open panel. The chase breathed a soft, neutral air. She whispered the habit of her thanks the way some people say grace. For the cool, for the note, for the way buildings hold hands with the people who listen. In January, when the term began again and the air cut like paper, the room behaved. The radiator learned its job when asked. The night stopped bringing heat like a dare. The panel stayed off anyway. They left it open not because they liked the view of a dark shaft, but because some doors, once discovered, should not be forced to forget they can open. One night in late February, when snow made a tidy line along the windowsill and the hall smelled like wool and wet boots, Mairead tuned and held a low note the way a person can hold a breath when they want the person across from them to finish their thought. The glass on the radiator did not ripple, the tick did not come. She let the note go, she smiled. Habit broken, she said, and then added, or perhaps trained. Spring came in fits of joy and apology. Sutter Hall turned quiet, then loud, then quiet again. Finals chalked the sidewalks with equations and wishes. On the last afternoon before move-out, Gentry and Tova came by with a work order that did not need signatures. "We are capping the chase permanently," Tova said. "Not the kind of permanent that forgets. The kind that leaves a note for the next person." Gentry nodded at the open panel. "Leave it if you want, we're not offended." He tapped the cinder block once with his knuckle and said, "Thanks for telling us. We need buildings to snitch on us. Otherwise, we fix the wrong things." They closed their boxes. They took the plants off the sill. They rolled the rug into a new shape. Bram signed their checkout forms with a flourish. In the hall, Isolde taped one last paper to the wall at eye level between 412 and 416. Not a manifesto, not a myth, a map. She had printed 2 copies. The little red dot, the words, "If your room gets warmer every night, you are not dramatic and you are not alone." The panel in the closet is held by 4 screws. Please listen for the tick. Please go to the basement cabinet with the green dent. And please, sleep. Your spine remembers its job when you do. She signed it tiny, just initials, because the story did not belong to her alone. Years later, when she would sleep in cities with windows that sealed shut and air that arrived by command, she would sometimes wake at 1:27 and rest her palm against the wall. Habit. Memory. A check-in with the building around her. She would feel the honest cool of drywall. She would hear the thrum of someone's TV 3 floors down, or a neighbor's late laugh, and think, heat pretended to be sound, then sound pretended to be heat, and we learned to name what was ours to name. If you are listening to this, and your room keeps getting warmer every night, put your hand on the wall. Count between the ticks if you hear them. Call the person with the name Patch and the quiet eyes. Ask them to look for the habit behind the system. And if you find a note in a chase, write your own, then leave the panel open long enough for the room to remember it can breathe. The night will arrive either way. It is better when it finds you ready, with a glass of water on the radiator and a song in your pocket that knows how to lay its hand gently on the room and say, "We hear you, we're staying. We're going to keep you company until morning cools the world back into something we can bear." He found a staircase in the lake. It still goes up. He did not see the staircase until the wind laid the lake down flat, a high mountain stillness that came like a held breath. It was late afternoon on Fontana Lake in western North Carolina, where drowned hills wear water like a borrowed coat, and the concrete dam throws a cold shadow that teaches you to look twice. The drought had been long, stingy, the kind that draws shoreline back like a tide that lost faith. Ansel Rook, 39, a surveyor who liked boats better than offices, let his rented skiff idle and watched the pale slope of silt with its driftwood teeth. Then the light tipped, and a line of gray stone showed under the green, not random at all, steps as even as counted breaths, leading up from water toward nothing that should exist. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? That October, 2022, the Smokies stood sharp against a sky the color of rinsed linen. The air smelled of leaf duff and gasoline and the faraway tang of rain that was always a rumor this year and rarely a fact. Ansel had driven out from Bryson City after lunch with a paper cup of coffee and a coil of measuring tape because the county had asked for photos of exposed foundations along the North Shore. The maps they kept were honest but out of date, and the lake was telling different stories every week. He wore a windbreaker the color of old blueberries, a hat with a frayed bill, and the face of a man who does not mind being alone if the work has edges. He cut the motor and drifted. The steps began in green water a little deeper than a tall man's reach, the lake clear enough in that pocket to show the top 3 treads, before light blurred into bottle glass. They continued above the surface, slick with algae at the line where water had been yesterday, then dry, then dusty, another dozen risers marching toward a slash of bank where saplings clawed at loose dirt. There was no porch, no house, no landing where a hand might reach for a knob, just a staircase that went up and then kept going as if the air were a hallway no one had told it how to be. Ansel nosed the bow toward the steps and let the skiff kiss the lowest dry riser. The hull made a hollow sound he heard in his knees. He stood, tested his balance, and stepped onto the first stone. It held. He took another. The risers were a hair shorter than modern code, built for legs from a different century. He climbed 10, then 11, then 12, a little more than a story, in a house that had learned to take weather as a sermon. He stopped where the steps met an absence and laid his hand on the sidewall that ran up either side like bones. Mortared fieldstone, careful work, the kind that starts with winter in mind. He looked back. The lake held his boat like a hand holds a toy. The dam stood off to the west, all angles and utility, its face unreadable. A loon called once far out, the syllable slanted and old. The stare made no answer, and that felt like an answer. He took out his phone. No signal, which is how stories get their chances. He knelt and ran his fingers over scrape marks in the treads where feet had once taught stone to be polite. He brushed silt from a riser with the cuff of his jacket and uncovered a line of letters someone had cut with a chisel and a spare hour. Willow Gap. The name felt right in the mouth. The steps had belonged to a place on a hillside that no longer agreed to exist. A truck rumbled on the scenic road above the tree line, then faded. Ansel stood. He is not a dramatic man, not a man who says the word haunted when the word history will do, but he felt a little movement in his scalp when his boot tried the next tread up and met nothing it could trust. He lifted his foot and set it again, and the soul found purchase on air as if stone continued in a material too stubborn for his eyes. He could feel something there, a resistance like the way a field of grass resists when you try to step through a place where deer have passed and the stems remember. He pressed. His weight held. He let it go and stepped back, heart knocking once, but not twice. He stood on the stair where real ended and whatever else began. The lake lapped below, measuring the hull against rock. A red maple leaf came down with dignity, landed on the seventh riser, and considered the long work of becoming loam. Ansel took a breath. He is a man who trusts second looks. He took one. The lake belonged to a body of stories people in Bryson City tell clean over pie. When the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded the valley to build the dam in the early 1940s, the town of Proctor had to move. Houses went down to foundations, barns left prints in the earth like giant hands, cemeteries were dug up with care and moved with ceremony, and some say not everything went where it should. On low years, people found stairs and walls, school steps, a chimney with a name carved into a cornerstone. On foolish years, people tried to steal the past, and the mud stole them instead. The county kept a list of places not to be brave. Ansel is not brave. He is patient. He walked back down to the skiff and dug out the coil of tape, a pencil, a stack of flagging ribbon. He thought of calling the park office and decided instead to take his measurements first and be useful with facts. He worked the way surveyors work, lengths and levels, muttering figures under his breath in a rhythm that kept the mind from dramatizing. He wrote Willow Gap on a page and underlined it softly with the pencil because the stone had asked. He measured tread depth, rise, total run to the bank, distance to the current water line, the angle of the bank above the last step. While he worked, a wind came from the east and pushed the surface into a skin. The steps looked less sure then. He set a small cloth bag at the foot of the first dry riser, full of pebbles and a coil of bright ribbon, because people in the mountains know that small offerings are not foolish if they help you think straight. Halfway through, he heard a bicycle bell, clear, bright, a single ring. He straightened. The sound did not belong to a road. It had the roundness of a thing sounded in an open room. He turned his head the way animals do when they want to aim an ear. The bell came again, faint, then a child's voice without words. the way children announce themselves to their own day. The air held it and gave it back. Then nothing. He called out a simple hello. The sound folded into the trees and did not return. He is not the kind of man who says names into a lake, so he went back to his numbers and let the bell be a sound that remembered and moved on. At sunset, he drove back to town. He did not mention the staircase at the diner because new stories grow better if you give them a night to decide their shape. He took his notes to the tiny desk in his rental and drew the thing. He wrote in the margin a line that was not part of any job he had ever been paid to do. The stair goes up past stone. The next morning, the lake wore a fog that fell in slow exhalations from the coves. He put the skiff in early, coffee in a thermos that had learned to keep secrets. The staircase waited. He climbed to the place where his boot had found air the day before. He lifted his foot and pressed again and met the same soft resistance, like cloth pulled tight across a doorway. The fog gathered and thinned. The lake stretched one slow muscle. He set his palm out where a banister would be if someone had considered such things. His fingers tingled with the small current that passes through the body at the exact moment a man tells himself he will try something and believes himself. He raised his knee and stepped onto what was not there. The foot held. He set the other. He stood an inch above the last stone and felt a dizzy smile crawl across his face as if he had been younger once and forgotten how to be. He took another. The air had weight where the step ought to be. He felt it through the rubber of his boot, a density that said, I am not stone and I am not stone. He climbed 3 steps in air and stopped because he is not brave. Breath is a kind of data. He took it in. The fog thinned. The stair under nothing led to a landing that the mind made, whether or not the world did. He imagined a door where the sky was, just to see if the imagination would draw a knob. It did not. He stepped back, down onto the good stone, and laughed once, quietly, pointedly, the way you tell yourself you are still a person whose days have jobs in them. On the 3rd day, he brought someone. Ansel is careful about who he invites into something he cannot name. He called Lucienne Pike, 61, who ran the little historical society in town with the energy of a river in March. She wore a quilted vest and a wool cap and the kind of boots women earn by living here. She brought pastries because facts get hungry and people are nicer when their hands are busy. She listened while he told it. She did not interrupt. She asked one question with her head tilted like a dog hearing a violin. Does it go up? It goes up, he said. They went out together. The skiff felt lightly ridiculous under the weight of their care. The morning did the few small things it always does before it remembers it is in charge. The staircase was there, gray in the light, patient as a broom left leaning against a wall you forgot to keep. Lucienne reached the second riser and stopped, and with an odd humility, put her palm to the wall so the stone might recognize her. She climbed to the place where air had learned a job. He watched her foot commit and hold. She gave him a look he will carry to his last morning. It had the quiet of a person who has been right about something important or wrong about something important and is making room for either result. She climbed one more and stopped. She did not push. She is not greedy. She came back down. Back in town, she made them tea in the society's office, which smelled of paper and lemon oil. She opened a ledger that had belonged to a church over the ridge that no longer stood. She turned pages until the binding sighed and laid flat, and then she tapped a finger next to a line written in a hand that had cared very much about straightness. Willow Gap Homestead, Brysonside. Stair and porch built by M. Garvey, 1931. Stepstones gifted by Applin sisters. She traced the names like a kind of blessing. People give names so the ground will keep them without bitterness, she said. Ansel told her about the bicycle bell, about the child voice that had no words. She nodded once, an economy that could hold an encyclopedia behind it. They found a photo in a folder of houses drowned to make the dam, a woman in a light summer dress halfway up a stair with a baby at her hip, and a boy of about 6 sitting on the landing with a tin pail, watching the photographer with straight seriousness. The steps were the same, the wall the same, the angle of the hillside the same, the lake not yet there to argue. Lucienne tapped a pencil against the margin of the picture and said the thing that opened the room. My grandmother told me she saw the army men come to measure in 38. She said a man from Willow Gap told them he would build his stair to the sky if it meant the water would have to think twice. She said he whistled while he worked, and his boy rode a bicycle so fast it learned the curve of the road and kept taking it when the road turned into a path and the path turned into a trail and the trail turned into someone's memory of a trail. She smiled with one side of her face. I think you found where the whistling goes. That night, Ansel dreamed slow water and a boy's bell moving away just fast enough to be allowed. He woke before dawn with rain finally practicing its lines on the roof. He left the boat on the trailer and took the road along the river to the dam because seeing the thing that made the change is sometimes a cure. The dam looked itself, muscle and worry. Men in hard hats wave the way men wave when their hands are busy with ladders and they still have manners. The sky had put its gray coat back on. The rain lasted 2 full days. The third day broke open into a light that could make a shuttered room reconsider. He took the skiff out at noon. The lake had risen a hand's width and drawn a green lip on the lower steps. He climbed again. The air steps remained, not drowned by a little more water, not meek. He stood on the third invisible tread and spoke toward the place where a door might be. Not loudly, not foolishly. Hello, he said. Then, because the air had made him braver than he ought to be, he added, I can bring your names back to where people can see them. The lake answered the way lakes answer, by being present with everything around them without offering comment. He sat on the fourth stone step and ate the pastry Lucienne had tucked into his pocket as if she had known he would forget to eat. He tried the air with his palm again and felt, for just a fraction of heart rhythm, a shape moved across it that was not his hand at all. The story traveled the way stories travel when they are useful. Not online, not yet. In town, over paper cups, in line at the post office, at the walk-in barber with the fish calendar 3 years behind. People gave him their versions. A woman who remembered a man who remembered seeing a parade of porches floating like rafts past the bend when the first flood came. An old man with a face like a woodcut who said he used to fish off a stone stair when his father was alive, and that if you whistled the tune that man used, you could make the bobber nod. A teacher who had kept a box of rail spikes and marbles found on low years and said she would clean them and bring them by the society office so Lucienne could have them or pretend not to want them like she always did. In late October, with 2 hard frosts behind them, the county asked Ansel to guide a ranger and a structural engineer to the site. They went out in a John boat that carried its own echo. The ranger was a woman named Haynes who wore the parks green like a promise and carried the weight of a radio the way people carry their father's ideas. The engineer was a man with a gentle way of touching old things before speaking ill of them. They stood on the 5th stone step and looked up the ladder of air and did not mock it. The ranger wrote in a book. The engineer crouched and set a level on the 2nd tread and laughed once softly when the bubble centered itself as if the past knew about precision. Haynes asked the question, stories have to survive. Is it dangerous? Ansel shrugged in a way that held 3 chapters. It is dangerous the way memory is dangerous, he said. It makes people want to keep climbing. It is dangerous the way stairs are when you forget you have a body with limits. It is not dangerous the way an alligator is, or a bar fight. They set 3 stakes in the bank and tied flagging ribbon between, a line that told people who had to approach that someone else had been wise before them. Haynes asked for a sign, the simple kind that reads caution and does not attempt poetry. Ansel offered to come and keep an eye some afternoons when he had work nearby. She wrote his cell number in her book and tucked the pencil behind her ear in a way his mother would have liked. In early November, a fog rolled in low and forgot to leave. The lake became a page erased and written over, erased again. School buses turned their lights on at noon. The mountain that wears the dam as a decoration hid its fine line. Ansel kept away because the fog makes men do things they forgive themselves for later, and a man ought to reduce his opportunities for forgiveness if he can. On the first clear morning after, he went out early and found 2 objects on the 4th stone step that could not have gotten there by falling. A bicycle bell, rusted but round, the striker frozen in a kind of kindness, and a tin pail, the exact wrong size for anything useful, dented where a boy might have clapped it to make the sound bigger. He touched neither. He sat down. He greeted them with his breath in line, the way you greet animals that have decided to be near you. At 10, Lucienne arrived with a thermos and 2 paper cups and the sort of force field that keeps good men from doing dumb things for no reason. She looked at the bell and the pail and did not pretend not to see them. She took photos that did not flatter the light and said the names in the ledger once: Lowe, Garvey, Applin, Willow Gap. She did not say a boy, she did not say a child. She put her hand on the sidewall and looked up the line of air with the plain candor of someone who has shored up more shelves than emotions and understands both. You can coax a story, she said, but not yank it. Take the bell to town. Leave the pail here for another day. We will see what the lake thinks of compromise. He took the bell gently, wrapped it in a handkerchief he had never found much use for before, and pocketed it like a chosen stone. Back at the office, Lucienne set it next to a photograph and a typed card. Bicycle bell recovered from Willow Gap Stair, fall of 22, likely pre-flood artifact. On the card, a second line in pencil for people who read too fast. The stair goes up. In the second week of December, with the mountains blue as a bruise and the wind deciding to be cruel to make up for lost time, Ansel went out one last day before the holidays. He brought a crowbar because he had promised himself he would not bring a crowbar until the story invited one. He did not need it. The pail had sat, then vanished, then returned, then sat again with a rock in it a little smaller than a fist. He took the rock out and saw in the bottom of the pail, scratched by some patient hand or the work of a nail held at an angle, 3 words: "Open in summer." He laughed out loud then. So loudly, a pair of ducks took off in a panic and told other ducks about him for an hour. He looked up at the sky, which had forgotten him to tend to larger business. He put the pail back on the step. He told it, with what dignity he could muster, that he would. Winter happened the way winter happens down there. One day, the lake wore a shell of rime like a dare. The next day, it rained hard as coins. Ansel worked a road job in the next county and came home tired to soup and a radio with the news that would not stop wishing it were better. He sent Lucienne postcards from 2 counties over with sketches of culverts no one needed, and she mailed him back photocopies of ledger pages with red pencil underlines that made more sense than his own arrows. By late June, the water had climbed enough to lick at the 3rd riser and cover the 1st. The air above the invisible steps still felt like fabric pulled tight by a careful hand. School let out, and visitors came with coolers and the need to float and forget. Haynes put the sign back up twice. Ansel sat on the 8th stone step more than once and told people kindly that there was nothing up there for them unless they had time to spare and patience to listen. A few listened, most did not. No one fell, which felt like a policy. On a hot Monday, when thunderheads built tall and polite to the south and forgot to arrive, he took the pail and set it in his lap and used the crowbar not as a pry, but as a weight. He eased the thin tin sides apart where they had been pinched back over the lip like a secret. Inside, he found folded oilcloth, soft as a worn glove. Inside that, a photograph no larger than his palm, and a strip of paper with a line that looked like a prayer until he read it, and it felt like a list. The photograph showed the stair as it had been before the lake, the woman in summer dress and the baby at her hip, and the boy with the pail, sitting with a seriousness that has no word in English. The man who must be M. Garvey stood 2 steps down, hat in hand, as if introducing the stairs to whoever had the camera. Behind them, the ridge wore its trees in a confidence the mountains teach. On the back, in careful letters, someone had written, "So you remember how we looked when the water was a rumor." The strip of paper held one long sentence. When they came with clipboards, he whistled the tune about willow leaves and said he'd build the stair to the sky because steps are a kind of truth, and the water would have to climb over the truth if it wanted to drown the house. There were names then, 3, the kind that drop out of families and get picked up by strangers who treat them right. He folded the strip back into the oilcloth and put all of it into the pail and set it on the step, because the story belonged to the stair more than it belonged to him. In August, a lightning storm chewed on the dam, and left it as it had found it. In September, a girl with a blue braid and a polka dot dress climbed the real stone steps and stood at the place where air did its work and played a penny whistle softly, 3 notes, and then a run. Her grandmother sat on the second step and wiped her cheeks with a tissue she pretended was for sweat. Lucienne watched from the bank with a composure she had purchased fairly over years of deciding when to speak and when to file. Haynes wrote a note in her book that read in an unsentimental hand, "Leave space here." The last time Ansel went before the rains came back for real, he climbed onto the third invisible tread and set his palm out at the height of a child's head. He did not feel breath. He felt pressure. A small, exact pressure like the world confirming a measurement you would have sworn was off by just enough to drive you mad. He closed his eyes and saw the boy on the landing with the pail and the bell. He saw a woman take the last 2 steps at a practical pace, baby on hip. He saw a man look out at a hillside that had just become a lake and refuse to let the stair be anything but stairs. He opened his eyes, and the lake went on being a lake. There is not a larger lesson he can give you from this, except the one he wrote in the margin of his notebook after the second week, a sentence he did not quite understand then and understands in the small of his back now. Not everything drowned. Some things learn to keep their shape in the air and wait for your foot. If you go to Fontana when the water is down and the wind minds its manners, you can find the stair if you ask the right person and you promise not to hurry. It will be there the way durable things are there, honest about their age, unwilling to entertain your stunts. You can put your boot on the third step and feel something that does not owe you an explanation hold you anyway. You can look up at the sky and decide there is a door or decide there isn't, and the stair will permit either decision. You can listen for a bicycle bell and you may hear a loon instead, and that will be enough. If you tell the story afterward, tell it the way lakes prefer, with pauses, with dates spoken out loud so the years remember they are not just numbers, with names because names weigh the right things down. Say Willow Gap, say Garvey, say Applin, say a boy, though the paper does not give him to you. Say a woman moving with a baby on her hip and a list in her head and a refusal to shame the stairs with panic. Say a man who whistled a leaf tune and believed in steps the way people believe in scripture, not as decoration, but as an instruction on how to move the body when the body wants to quit. And if you find yourself on a day when the wind drops and the water stills, and you are offered the choice to test a step that does not belong to stone, ask your breath first. Make it even. Set your palm where a rail would be. Put your weight down like a promise. If it holds, climb one and stop. The air prefers people who do not need to conquer it to feel tall. Leave something small on the 5th step. A ribbon, a marble, a bell that waited in a drawer too long. Walk back down and let the day close the drawer. The stair will keep going up whether you are there to witness the miracle of plain persistence or not. That is how some things survive the flood. They decide to be their own house. They decide to be the part of the house you cannot drown. The babysitter heard a voice, "Don't answer the door." The first knock came at 8:53 on a rain-polished Saturday in late October, the kind of night in Portland, Oregon, when sidewalks shine and porches feel closer to the river. The house on Birch Hollow Court sat half a block from a small park that still carried the day's damp laughter. Inside, the dishwasher murmured, and a kettle tried to be brave. The babysitter stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, listening because something in the sound at the front of the house asked to be listened to. The knock was polite, then it wasn't. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Isola Marin, 19. Art student, commuter, weeknight sitter for families who liked the way she paid attention. She had a way of noticing and then not needing to say what she had noticed. 2 children slept upstairs in rooms that smelled like clean cotton and a little of crayons. Oren, 5, a collector of sticks, and Juniper, 3, a thumbsucker who dreamed with her hands still resting on the bed rail as if the world might roll. Their parents, Elowin and Cormac Pike, had left at 7:15 for a long-promised dinner with friends on the east side. The year was 2016, when doorbells had learned to film you and phones hummed even when you wished them quiet. Isola had arrived early because she liked the first hour best when the house met you and you met it. The Pike's Place had bones from the 1930s and confidence from a do-it-yourself remodel. A deep porch with a swing, pine floors that told the truth when the humidity rose, a narrow staircase that gave out a soft warning at the third tread. The front door had a knob smooth with history and a deadbolt that made a good, finished sound. Someone had left a bowl of apples on the kitchen island and a note in Elowen's looping hand, "Help yourself to anything except the chocolate chips." The note had a smile drawn like a quick breeze. There was also a line at the bottom that felt like it had been added while standing up. "If someone knocks and we're not back yet, don't answer." That line had made Isola breathe out through her nose, amused. Then the weather settled in, and the streetlight outside made the rain look like it had purpose, and she read the line again without amusement and put it into the pocket in her mind where she kept instructions that were probably not overcautious. The first knock came, then the doorbell. The chime had been replaced during the remodel and sounded like an idea of a doorbell rather than a doorbell itself. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola glanced at the hallway. The front camera should have sent her phone a picture, but her phone sat face down on the counter as an experiment in being a better person. She lifted it. No alert. No snapshot of a porch visitor wet with evening. She opened the app anyway. The screen showed a frozen image from 2 hours ago when the delivery driver in a yellow slicker had left a cardboard box and made a joke to the camera about swimming away. She touched the screen to wake it. It refused. The second knock came, not loud, but certain. She heard a hush behind the sound, no traffic for that moment, no neighbor's laugh, the rain taking a breath. "Coming!" she called, and heard the word bounce off the door and regret its volume. She crossed the living room, passing the lamp with the heavy base and the stack of picture books Elowen had left, lined up for bedtime like a plan that had already succeeded. She stopped 3 steps from the door, where you can still see the whole threshold and also the 3 framed photos on the wall to the right. Pike family on the Oregon coast, Pike family at a pumpkin patch, Pike family on a couch in this very room, elbows touching. The peephole showed dark. Not the dark of a coat, too close. The dark of rain pressuring the lens. She tilted her head to the side window, the one with the glass etched in a pattern of leaves. A shape stood on the porch, too close to see contours, tall enough to be adult. Still, she thought of families who send a neighbor to drop off a sweater, of packages misdelivered, of jokes. She reached up, fingers on the deadbolt, and then the voice came from the stairwell behind her, even and close, a whisper and not a whisper, a way of speaking that used the room more than it used the air. "Don't answer the door." Isola stopped moving. The words had come from the landing, or the old heating vent in the hall, or the part of a house where stair and wall meet and decide to be patient. She turned her head, slow, like a deer deciding whether the sound belongs to a creek or to a person who has forgotten how feet work. No one stood there. Only the line of light from the kitchen, a run of framed children's drawings on the stair wall, and the slight turn of the banister at the top where a hand likes to pause. "Hello," she said, not loud, not questioning, simply acknowledging the world's habit of speaking up when you have one hand on a lock. Down the hall, the nightlight in Oren's room painted a small boat shape on the floor. She took her hand off the deadbolt. On the porch, the shape shifted its weight. The doorbell chimed again, 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola's phone remained stubbornly uninterested. She felt her scalp fizz, as if the body were sprinkling sugar there. She stepped back 1 foot, then another, until the space between her and the door felt like a sentence with the right number of commas. She set the phone on the entry table and kept her eyes on the door. The shape did not knock again. "Can I help you?" she called, calm. "The owners aren't home." The shape made no answer. The rain decided to be louder for a few seconds, then took its apology and softened. A car passed at the end of the block, and its tires whispered on wet asphalt, then left them again. The shape did not say, "Leave this," or "I'm lost," or "Wrong address." It did not step down the stairs or shift toward the window to try a too close look. It stood. The voice from the stairs came again, almost the same, the almost important. "Don't answer, Iso." No one called her ISO except two people who were not in this house. Not even Elowen, who preferred full names like a teacher who still missed a chalkboard. The nickname arrived and held. The quiet around it learned how to be heavier. Isola is not the kind of person who does brave for style. She does careful as choreography. She picked up the heavy flashlight from the umbrella stand and felt the weight in her fingers like a vote. She walked backward into the living room, never turning her back to the door until the couch was behind her knees. Then she set the flashlight on its end on the coffee table, ready to throw its beam like a purposeful animal. She tapped the phone awake. Now, the camera app sent an alert, but when she opened it, the image from the porch was empty but for rain. A rain curtain, the edge of the porch railing. No shape, no wet footprints on the mat when she zoomed, though that could be the grain of the old wood lying. The house held itself very still. Oren coughed once upstairs and rolled to a new dream. The dishwasher hit its dry cycle and made a small whir, as if about to tell a joke. Isola stood. She walked to the staircase and put her hand on the newel post because sometimes wood is better than a person's breath. She stepped up the first 3 treads, the third giving its soft warning, and peered down the hall. Juniper's door was open, just enough for night to move through. Oren's was open a little wider because he had insisted, recently, that he could hear better if the door learned to be brave, and no one had argued with the logic. "Thank you," she said to the landing. She felt ridiculous. She felt correct. The phone hummed. A text from Cormac, running late, dessert took forever. "You good?" She typed, "Yes." All quiet. Then after a second, a person knocked. Didn't answer. "All good." He bubbled back a thumbs up and a "let me know if weird." She did not type the lines she could not yet shape. She put the phone in her back pocket and went to the kitchen kettle. Tea might give the house another language to speak in. At 9:11, the sound came again. Not the knock. The dry slide of weight on porch boards, then a new voice, not in the room and not in the rain, a man's voice on the other side of the door, pitched to be reassuring and succeeding halfway. "Hey there," it called. "Sorry to bug you. My car slid a bit. I'm fine, just could I borrow a phone charger? Mine died." Isola stood very still on the tile by the stove. Charged phones. The sentence wore a coat of sense. It also wore the same coat a story uses when it wants to be invited inside. She felt the stare voice rest itself like a hand just between her shoulders. "Don't answer. I can call a tow from here," she said. "If you tell me your name and plate, I'll call it in." A beat. The rain breathed. A neighbor's porch light clicked on 2 doors down, as if someone there had a similar feeling that night, should know it was being watched. "Sure," the voice said, cheerful, hurried. "Yeah, okay, appreciate it. I'm Kai. Plate is Washington, ZNJ." He trailed. The sound changed as if he had turned his head, as if reading something off a thing that had decided not to help him. "Hold up. Hard to see in the rain." "Okay," Isola said. She took a pen from the junk drawer. She did not step toward the door. The voice did not finish. The porch boards did the shift sound again, the one a body makes when deciding to step down, then silence, which is a choice. She waited a full minute and then padded back to the front hall, one foot making no more sound than the idea of a foot. Through the etched glass, she could see only the suggestion of a person-shaped absence where rain fell differently. The porch swing moved a breath back and forth, though she had not seen it move before tonight. She put her ear near the wood and did that thing you do against doors you don't mean to open. She listened to the hinge. She heard air. She did not hear breathing. She backed away because she did not owe the door any of the parts of her face. At 9:27, the voice from the stairs came a third time, and now it had a softness that made her throat ache. "Don't answer the door, Isola." "Okay," she said, and laughed once, not unkind. "Okay." She called the non-emergency line. The operator's voice was brisk, then kinder when she heard the children's ages. They sent a patrol car to cruise Birch Hollow Court. The officer rolled slow under the maples, touched 2 fingers to his brim up toward the windows like old practice, then slid away toward the park. He called to tell her he'd found no car in distress, no one walking in rain. She thanked him the way a person thanks another, for being willing to be seen doing their job. At 10:09, something touched the back door. Not a knock, the whisper sound of a finger on glass. Isola turned off the kitchen light and let the room become a place where her eyes could do their best work. She stood behind the island and let one breath out, as if teaching her ribs a rule. The finger on glass again. Scrape. Gentle. A child in some houses might do that, playing ambush. But the child would laugh or give himself away with breath fogging the pain in a haunted oval. The voice in the hall didn't speak. It didn't need to. Isola aimed the flashlight at the floorboards and thumbed it on. The beam carved a clean white lane across the tile and into the mudroom, up onto the window, where a skin of condensation wavered on the glass like a thought. No face waited beyond it, only the moon in its nearly new mood, and the reflection of her own shoulder shaping into something braver than she felt. The scrape came again. The flashlight beam caught the faintest arc at the level of a hand. She walked a half step closer and saw what had made it. On the outside of the glass, pressed lightly against the pane as if placed, and then hesitated and then not taken away, was a leaf. A maple leaf quilted with rain, stem hanging like a punctuation mark. It trembled and dragged and lifted free. That was all. By 10:45, the children were deep in the kind of sleep that makes a house feel like it has set down a heavy bag. Isola sat in the living room and read 3 pages of a book without hearing a word, then closed it and looked at the door again and felt foolish again for looking at a door. She texted Elowen, "No rush, all fine." Their reply came in a minute. "On our way, rain slow, be home around 11:15, and wore the sound of people who have begun putting coats on." At 11:19, as headlights turned the corner outside and rain slicked away from tires and the familiar shape of the Pikes' wagon slowed by the curb, the doorbell chimed a third time. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola stood in the hallway, hand on the deadbolt, and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, the wagon door closed. Cormac ran up the steps in a coat wet enough to laugh at itself. He patted his pockets like a magician who had dropped something essential. He had not rung. The bell had decided to make a ceremony for him anyway. Elowen kissed Isola's cheek in the open doorway and apologized to the night for taking their time. Cormac did a father's walk down the hall to glance into his children's rooms, even though he had been told they were sleeping. Isola told them the short version. A knock, a voice asking for a charger, a patrol car that had been kind. The line on their note she had obeyed in a way that made the marrow in her wrist feel hot. Elowen's mouth went still. Not hard, still. She looked toward the stairs, like a person checking if water had been left running in an upstairs bathroom. "Thank you," she said. "I should have told you more about that line on the note. It felt like telling too much would make it silly, but I should have told you." "I heard a voice," Isola said, careful as she said it, ready to be believed, ready to be joked with. "From the landing. It told me not to answer. It knew my name." Elowen closed her eyes and nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They made tea. Cormac sat on the arm of a chair like a man who cannot bend himself small enough to fit back into an ordinary evening. Elowen told the story the way you tell one when you have lived with it long enough to know where its corners are. 2 winters before, she said, on a night when the river lifted itself and tried on a deeper voice, a man had walked the neighborhood knocking on doors asking for help. When people opened, he asked to come in and make a call, and if they stepped aside, he would cross the threshold with a speed that felt like another person had told him to hurry. Police had found him at the park pavilion where he had been sleeping rough, talking to a friend only he could hear. He never hurt anyone, Elowen said, but the nights after that felt like a door with a hard-to-find key. 2 weeks later, Cormac said, picking up the part he needed to say, "We were here with a sitter, not you, a college kid named Pike, no relation, and something similar happened. Knock. Voice." He started toward the door, and Juniper, who was barely 2, sat up and said clear as a broadcast, "Don't answer, Daddy." She was barely speaking in sentences. She said it right. My mother's voice used to say it to me when I would go to the door for anybody. Something about the way Junie said it It sounded like my mother and not like my daughter, and also like my daughter anyway. I didn't open the door. We watched through the side glass. There was nobody there. The bell chimed again. And then, Elowen added, last spring, when we were packing for a visit to my sister's, the doorbell chimed at 2:17 in the morning. Twice. Cormac checked. No one. Junie sat up and said it again. Don't answer the door. We changed the batteries in the chime. We changed the camera. We got smarter about being dumb. But the voice, it comes when it needs to. And she sleeps through it now. We hear it and we listen to it, and then we don't tell anyone because the world doesn't know what to do with a family in a sentence. They laugh softly, a release. The kettle sighed. Rain found a new tempo along the gutters. Isola told them about the man who had used the name Kai and about the way the shape had filled the porch and then been only Rain when she asked questions. She said the nickname the voice had used for her and watched Elowen's face widen in a slow astonishment that contained no fear. It knows, Elowen said. It knows who it needs to keep. They did not turn the story into an advertisement for another religion. They put the house back in order. Isola took the extra bills Cormac offered only after he insisted 3 times. She put on her jacket, damp from fear she didn't call fear, and stepped out onto the porch with them. The porch looked like any porch. The swing creaked because swings are built to do that, at least a little. The streetlight watched their car for a second, then got bored. Elowen reached for Isola's hand and squeezed, once, like a benediction you don't have to keep. On the drive home, the wipers kept time for a song Isola wouldn't have recognized if it had been played for her on a better night. She went under the overpass, where a man with a shopping cart had built a small palace of pallets and hope. She went by the open all-night grocery, where the cashier sells soup to people whose apartments never learned to hold heat. She went by a block of houses where the windows showed families still awake and not sorry. At a red light, she lowered her window and let the rain reach all the way in and touch her cheek, and then she rolled it back up and laughed, because the world had not insisted on being only one thing. The voice didn't follow her. It stayed with the house that needed it. Weeks went by without another knock at an odd hour. Leaves went to ground, and then to bags, and then to wherever leaves go when they've done their first job. On a Thursday in early December, Isola sat for another family across town and saw, on the neighborhood chat, a thread begin. Did anyone hear a bell twice last night around 2? The comments were predictable, then less so. A woman 4 streets over wrote that her grandmother used to leave a ribbon on the inside doorknob to remind herself not to open for kindness in the exact hour when kindness is most dangerous. A man who taught band at the high school wrote that he lived alone and still heard a voice sometimes when he put his hand on the deadbolt, and it always sounded like a person who had spent the afternoon organizing drawers and would simply not have the mess of a poor decision. Near midnight, her phone hummed. A text from Elowen, a photo of Juniper asleep on the couch under a quilt, toes poking out like arguments. Under it, a simple line. When she was half asleep tonight, she said, "Tell Iso thanks. The thanks is from me too." That winter, the door stayed a door. Spring arrived with a rhythm it was proud of. The voice came twice, each time for Isola, once at the Pike House, and once oddly in a different house where the rule felt the same though the picture frames were new. Don't answer. Each time she didn't. Each time the world failed to end. Each time she thought of how many doors in this country stand between people who need help and people who will offer it and people who mean harm and the harm they intend. She learned something small and, to her, permanent. Safety and kindness are not enemies. They are a ladder. You step to the next rung when it will hold, not before. In late summer, after her semester ended and before the new one began, she took a train to see family in Eastern Washington. In the dining car, a man waved her to the empty seat across from him, the way travelers do when their stories want company, and she accepted. He was older, but not old, wore a ball cap with the logo torn off, and had one of those faces that make you feel remembered. He asked what she did. She said art and children and listening. He nodded as if that were a single profession. He told her he had been a night manager at a motel once, decades back, and how sometimes the night tells you who to open the door for and who to speak to through glass. and how your body knows if you let it be the first expert. He said his mother's voice still visited clear, not spooky, not the kind of thing you put in a movie, and told him the one sentence that she had left him as a tool: don't answer the door, not because you aren't good, because you are. She returned to Portland with a sketchbook full of stairways and kettles and porch swings. She babysat for the Pikes the first Friday of October, a night with dry leaves and a moon that put on a mustache of cloud, and then laughed at itself. The bedtimes went easy. The dishwasher hummed. At 9:14, the bell chimed once and stopped. She walked to the door and put her hand on the newel post and waited. The voice did not come this time. The house trusted her to have learned. She didn't answer. Later, when Elowen got home and leaned against the door while she took her boots off and said, "I love my boots and I love taking them off," Isola told her about the single chime. Elowen laughed softly and asked if she wanted pie, and they ate pie in the kitchen with their spoons, making small civilized noises, and the night minding its business. If you want a moral, there isn't one sharp and neat enough to slice bread. There is a sentence that belongs to a particular house on Birch Hollow Court, and maybe to your house too if you need it. Don't answer the door. It doesn't mean never. It doesn't mean be a city made of fear. It means listen for the moment your body tells you the story the night is trying to sell, then say no with enough steadiness that the night has to take its pitch elsewhere. If you are ever in a quiet house with children sleeping like small planets upstairs, and the door learns a new trick with its hinge at a time of night when even helpful people forget how to stand, and you hear a voice that knows your name and the shape of your life, let it be a chain on the inside, not a chain on the world. Make tea. Call for help you trust. Stay in the room with the light. Thank the air when it warns you, even if the thanks feels ridiculous in your mouth. Names will still be names in the morning, doors will still be doors. And you will have kept the lesson the old houses know. Sometimes the kindest act is to hold still while the night tries your latch and finds it true.